Charles is on his best behaviour. It's very apparent with the whole Trump state visit. Charles has got very different opinions to Trump on a number of subjects, including particularly the environment, as does William. But both Charles and William are going to be very nice to Donald Trump when he comes over, and they're going to put such differences to one side. Charles wants to help Keir Starmer's government, as he would any government, but he's making it very apparent that he's there to be helpful.
That's the job.
Hello, I'm Roya Nikar.
And I'm Kate Mancy. Welcome to The Royals with Roya and Kate. Now, in recent weeks, we've talked to author Andrew Lowney about the allegations about Prince Andrew.
And we've heard from our fellow royal reporter Simon Viger on his big question to the King. Would he consider a referendum? Perhaps revolution is in the air.
But today, we've got a journalist and author whose new book is asking some big questions and whose details about the royals, the palace and politicians have made headlines here at the Times and the Sunday Times. That book is called Power and the Palace, the inside story of the monarchy and 10 Downing Street. And the author is Valentine Low, the former royal correspondent for the Times. Thank you for being here, Valentine.
Thank you.
That's a pretty punchy headline, isn't it? pretty punchy title for your book.
It is. I mean, it's a fascinating subject. I'm fascinated with how it's changed over the years.
Val, let's start. Let's get stuck in there straight away and start with two of the very biggest stories that boomed all over the front pages in the last week. The first of which was your claim, backed up, I'm sure, by impeccable sources, that the late Queen was a Remainer in the Brexit debate.
Yep.
And the second was this extraordinary revelation, which again made all the front pages early this week, that the Queen Camilla was the subject to an attempted sexual assault on a train on the way to Paddington when she was a teenager, which she then reported to the police. So just start by telling us a little bit more about both of those and how you came to find those out.
So if we take the Remainer story first, we'll all remember that during the Brexit referendum 2016, there was a famous front page story in the Sun, headlined "Queen Backs Brexit," and it was based on a lunch that had happened a few years before at Windsor Castle, at which the Queen had expressed views about the European Union. I think she said, "I don't understand the EU," and apparently she'd said this with quotes, "venom and emotion," close quotes.
So it was thought that she actually was Brexiteer for a while. You read those headlines.
Exactly. And the Sun actually had his knuckles wrapped over that story because the press regulator said that the headline was not justified
Didn't back up
by the evidence in the copy.
Yeah, that old chestnut.
People went away with the impression that the Queen was a Brexiteer, even though there were sort of strange hints, like a hat she once wore seemed to be in the EU colours, but a dress that Angela Kelly denied there was any plot behind that. Anyway, as part of my research for this book, I spoke to various ministers, and I spoke to one who told me that during the campaign, he happened to have a conversation with the Queen, and she had said to him, "I don't think we should leave the EU." And she said, "I think it's better to stick with the devil you know." Now
So turn that story on its head.
It really completely turned it around. So it shows she was, a Remainer, possibly a reluctant Remainer, but a Remainer all the time, all the same. And I think it's clear that she would have voted Remain if she'd had a vote, which of course she doesn't.
And why does it matter whether she was a Brexiteer or a Remainer, or the fact that that never came out really conclusively during her lifetime?
Well, it doesn't matter in one sense because the Queen has no political power.
Yep.
She's not there to influence policy in any way whatsoever. It does matter because if it got out during the campaign, it might have had an effect on the result. We all remember the result was 52% for leaving against 48% for staying in. And who knows if it had been known that the Queen thought we should stay in, despite her criticisms of the EU, because she had criticisms saying she thought she found the bureaucracy sort of exasperating. But if her view had come out, it might have swung it the other way.
Now, people at the palace would always say that she kept her views very close to her chest because, the fact that we're even having this conversation, the fact that it's interesting is because she did. She kept everything so close to her chest.
Yes, exactly, very much
so. But are you sure that those sources aren't just reading into it that minister was a Remainer and they're reading into it that she was on their side? Did she perhaps give people the impression that she was on their side if she wasn't?
I know that this is what the palace is trying to put out, misinterpreted remarks, but
No, I don't think it's misinterpreted, but I think...
But the account of the conversation was quite clear.
Yeah.
This is what the Queen said. I mean, assuming that my source is recounting the conversation correctly, and there's absolutely no reason to suggest they're not, it's quite clear she was a Remainer. Which is not to say she was a sort of flag waver for the EU, not at all. Mm-hmm. But I think that, and I think it's all to do with the fact that the Queen was essentially a small c conservative. But this idea that the Queen didn't express her views, this is what we've all been brought up on. And to
publicly,
yeah. And even privately to an extent, people say that. And I've spoken to ministers, who've said that you didn't get any impression about what her political views was. But I think there were times when she did express views, and I think possibly as she grew older, she became more open in her views. But of course, this stuff never came out because people around her were so discreet. One example, when she was free with her opinions. Long after he stopped being a minister, Malcolm Rifkind was talking to the Queen and was asking her how she was getting on with her Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. And she said she found him a very interesting person. And there'd been a line in her Queen's speech, I think this is 2021.
Which could be read either way, couldn't it? An interesting person.
Well, exactly. but a line in the Queen's speech about trying to encourage the 40 million girls around the world to go to school, because there are lots of countries where girls don't go to school, tried to get girls into school. And she said she was particularly pleased about this. So again, expressing opinion both about her Prime Minister and about the contents of the Queen's speech. And we never hear her express opinions about the contents of the Queen's speech.
There's something in your book where you say that the palace had actually taken out bits of the Queen's speech that had been written by Johnson's team.
Yes,
so they had sort of made sure that she did have that distance.
It's all about the language. It's never about the content. So the policy is entirely it's what the government's policy is. Mm-hmm. But occasionally there's things which, if there's language which is a bit too political. And I think there was something about Rwanda which they were a little uncomfortable with.
That was the plan that Johnson had, to send asylum seekers to Rwanda to be processed before they came back to Britain.
There was something there which is not the policy but just the language, and then something about Brexit, and there's something about taking back control. I don't know if it was that exact phrase, but along those lines, which again the palace just felt it was a bit too political, weren't quite comfortable with the Queen saying it, so they just toned down the language. But this is an old problem. There was a Labour minister in Harold Wilson's era. Going back a way, who watched the Queen's speech on television and thought, and he'd been responsible for it, this minister, and thought, oh my God, this sounds absolutely awful, the stuff we're making the Queen say. We've got to sort of make it more easy to read and make it more normal.
Right, so sort of making it more colloquial in a way, I suppose. Maybe not colloquial, but
less weird and stiff and political, yes, certainly.
I think one of the things, I've read the book, and one of the things that seems to come out for me is that the Queen felt able to sort of be more free with her views with politicians she trusted and had a natural rapport with.
Yes.
And on the subject of Boris Johnson, you mentioned that she found him a very interesting person. I suspect she probably wasn't quite as free with her views with him as she perhaps was with someone like Harold Wilson. But one of the fascinating things that's come out in your book, courtesy of Boris Johnson, not keeping private conversations private, is this revelation that Camilla told him while she was Duchess of Cornwall that she had been the subject of an attempted sexual assault. We know that obviously she's a huge campaigner on domestic violence, women who've been victims of sexual assault. Tell us a little bit more about how that came out.
That came out because I was interviewing someone called Gito Harry, who had been in charge of Boris's communications when he was mayor of London, and also had a stint doing the same job at number 10 Downing Street. But this is when Boris had recently become mayor. And he had a meeting with Charles. Went okay, but not terribly well, partly because they were late. They'd gone from City Hall, they got on the wrong tube in the wrong direction. So they arrived at Clarence House rather flustered. I'm not sure that went down terribly well with Charles. And then shortly after that, the Queen wanted to invite Boris for tea because she told Charles that he looks great fun. So Boris comes for tea, and he and Guito don't make a mistake with the tube this time. They actually cycle over to Clarence House.
Which Camilla couldn't believe.
Camilla couldn't believe it. She came down to meet them at the bike sheds to say, I can't believe you cycled.
grabs him by the arm and then hoiks him up to the meeting.
Hoiks him up for tea. They chat for about an hour. They get on like a house on fire. They like each other enormously. And Boris is just in seventh heaven afterwards. But there was also a serious aspect to the and Boris Johnson at the time was planning to set up some rape crisis centres around London, and this was obviously a subject close to Camilla's heart with her campaigning, which you've talked about. And in that, she mentions that as a teenage schoolgirl, she'd been travelling to London on the train, and some guy started groping her, and Boris was, absolutely eyes on stalks and said, "My God, what did you do?"
Yeah.
And she said, "Well, I did what my mother taught me. I took my shoe off and whacked him in the nuts with a heel," which is kind of wonderful illustration of Camilla's sort of strength and robust character.
You can actually imagine her saying it to Boris as well.
Yeah.
What's interesting is she has never chosen to reveal that in all her speeches on domestic violence, on sexual assault, on why she campaigns, on the need for it. She has never revealed her own personal experience. Boris Johnson has, and he's done it more than once, breached that unspoken rule of these conversations are private. But what's fascinating to me is that the palace haven't pushed back on it.
I'm going to interrupt you. You say Boris revealed it. I mean, in a sense, yes, he did. But he confided his closest aide, who then didn't tell the story for, whatever it is, 6 or 7 years.
Boris's camp.
Do we think that Gitto Harry speaking to you for the book had Boris's his say-so? He had his approval to share that story.
I don't think so.
No, it just sort of came up in conversation,
It just came up in conversation. I think Gitto thought it was already out there.
Right. It does kind of shed new light on, something that's perhaps driving her passion behind it, or certainly her own experience for it.
Yeah.
And what was the palace's reaction when you gave them full warning of this before it went in the book?
At the risk of sounding incredibly pompous, I can't divulge conversations with the palace. But yes, I spoke to them.
Because
you'll notice there's been no complaint from the palace so far.
They haven't commented, but they're not disputing the story.
And as well as I do, I think that Camilla's attitude is a pragmatic one. She thinks that if this encourages women and girls who've been the victims of an attack of whatever nature to feel that there's no stigma attached, there's no shame, and if it makes it easier for them to talk about it, that's a positive.
And why do you think she hasn't talked about it before?
Hers was an unpleasant, upsetting incident which happens too often, but it's a minor one compared to the things that she's talking about in her campaigning and the sorts of tales that she hears when she talks to people. So I don't think she wanted to draw the attention to herself. So she doesn't want to diminish the experiences of others, and she doesn't want to draw unnecessary attention to herself personally. And I think that's entirely commendable.
It's a very powerful, quite explosive revelation in the book. Are there any sort of similar kind of revelations that you discovered that you haven't included in the book, that were either too difficult or would be too controversial, or you felt were tricky with the sourcing?
Well, that's a good question. What's on the cutting room floor, Val?
Well,
Power in the Palace, the sequel.
Nothing is held out because it's too difficult or too controversial. There are a couple of stories which I heard. One, a politician told me and said, "This is off the record, this is not for use."
You're like, damn.
Months later.
You checked the recording. Did he really say that?
Months later, I tried to persuade this politician. I constructed a very well-argued case why it was perfectly okay to tell the story, but they said no, so I just had to respect that.
Yeah.
And another reached me from sort of second-hand, but of purest provenance from an impeccable source, a fantastic story which was both amusing and shed light on the Queen and politics. But because of the sourcing, I just cannot use it. It's, but you just have, as a journalist, as a writer, you've got to respect these things.
Well, you talk about the Queen, you talk about the late Queen divulging information and perhaps her opinions on things, but there's also some fascinating revelations about the Prince of Wales, as he was then, now King Charles, and also the current Prince of Wales and how they perhaps help. So there's a great story about Prince Charles being quotes, in the doghouse.
Oh,
Can you tell us about that? Because that's really interesting.
This is around 2012, I think it is, or the Duchess of
Prince
Cambridge
George.
was pregnant. And this change in the law, which would allow royal daughters to have the same succession rights as royal sons, was going through. And Charles invites a senior civil servant, Richard Heaton, who was permanent secretary at the Cabinet Office, I think I've got that right, to tea at Clarence House to talk about various things. They talked about various things. And then he starts asking him questions about the succession to the crown bill, and says, well, if I have a granddaughter and if she marries a Smith, will it become the House of Smith? I mean, the questions like that.
Instead of House of Windsor, yeah.
Yeah, instead of the House of Windsor. And this civil servant Heaton, it's not his responsibility, it's not his area, and he hasn't been briefed on it, but he just tries to answer the questions.
He's on the back foot a little
He's
bit.
on the back foot. He answers the questions as best he could. Fine, goes on holiday. Then about a week or two later, there's a front page story. This obviously causes a huge kerfuffle. He gets a call from the Cabinet Secretary's office saying, well, what's all this about? And then you fast forward a week or two to when he comes back from holiday and he goes to see the Cabinet Secretary, Jeremy Hayward, and says, what's all this about Charles? And Hayward says, oh, don't worry about that. Charles is in the doghouse now.
Meaning that Charles is in the doghouse with his mother, the Queen.
Yeah, Charles is in the doghouse with the government.
With the government.
Because he had leaked the details of the conversation. He'd misrepresented the conversation in their view. And
we assume somebody from his office leaked it, but it's unclear.
Yeah,
but yeah.
And he had questioned government policy, which he's not meant to do. So, yeah, Charles was in the doghouse.
On that subject, one of the key threads of your book is the changing nature of members of the royal family, that relationship between members of the royal family, monarchs, heirs apparent, and government, and how that has changed from Queen Victoria's time through to present day.
Yeah.
And I think one of the fascinating things that you explore is, and we know as royal reporters, and we report on it, is that the current king, Charles, and the current heir apparent, the Prince of Wales, we know more about their political views, their views on social issues, on the environment, on homelessness, on matters of faith, on the Middle East conflict. They've made statements, speeches, fired off Black Spider memos for years on it. So we know more about Charles and William's views on politics and issues of the day than perhaps we really have known about them from previous monarchs and heirs apparent previously. And there's a wonderful quote in it that stays with me, which was Lloyd George to the future Edward VII saying, if you are to one day be a constitutional monarch, you must first become a constitutional Prince of Wales. And my question to you is, do you think Charles and William have done and are doing that?
It's a very good question, but I would interject first of all by saying, actually, previous monarchs, we've known an awful lot about their political opinions. I mean, Queen Victoria, she was politically very controversial. She started off by being a Whig, and actually supported the Whigs in a general election by giving them money, and then became a Tory. George V was a Tory. Lloyd George couldn't stand George V because he thought he was a dreadful old Tory. George VI definitely used to, although he had a good relationship with Clement Attlee, the Labour Prime Minister after the war, he definitely had criticisms about some of his policies. So actually we've known quite a lot about previous sovereigns' political views. Queen Elizabeth II was in a funny way an outlier on that.
Bit more passive role, I think William has said she took.
Well, a passive role and a quieter about her opinions. Of course, she never gave interviews.
So, in the modern era, in the modern age.
To go back to your question, I think what's interesting about Charles is how he's changed his ways. Writing this book, I was reminded about what a meddling prince he was and how he had clashes. He had clashes with conservative ministers, conservative governments. He had clashes with Labour. Famously with the Blair government. But he dialed it down, as you know all too well. But before he became king, he signalled quite explicitly in an interview that he knew the difference between being king and Prince of Wales, and he was not going to be the same meddling prince. And the proof of the pudding's in the eating. Since he's become king, he's played a very different game, and it's been noticeable how in his first 4 speeches, I think, after becoming king, he referred to the Constitution in every single one of those, and that was to signal that he was going to be a good constitutional monarch. And I think that's what he's done so far. And
then passing on to his son. There is an element in the book where you talk about Prince William almost sort of going to the Queen to encourage her to say something about Brexit.
Yes.
Scotland.
He wanted her to do something about Scotland, and then of course there's a famous occasion in an article by yourself, Roya, after prorogation.
Oh yes,
where
he wasn't happy about that at all.
He was you'll remember during Brexit, in order to get Brexit through Parliament. Boris does this sort of somewhat controversial thing of proroguing Parliament, which happens every year, but he wanted to do it for much longer than previously and for political motives. In the end, that got overturned by the Supreme Court. William was furious, thought she'd been abused, thought she'd been embarrassed, and he let it be known, or he told friends, that under his reign there would be more robust challenging of advice.
And what's your view on that? Having assessed it from previous monarchs right through to the present day, the fact that he will be more robust. Do you think that's an error?
Well, I mean, it's very interesting because this word advice is very crucial. It's not the word. Doesn't mean what you and I think of as advice. If the Prime Minister, if the government advises the monarch something, that's an instruction essentially. They have to follow it. They're obliged to follow it. That's what the Constitution says. So this idea, and I spoke to someone very senior in Whitehall about this, and they said, if you think about it for just 30 seconds, that's an incredibly stupid thing to say. So Whitehall's view is,
But
no.
if you think about it with the proroguing example, which he was talking about, that turned out was ruled to be unlawful.
Exactly, but it's not. It wasn't the sovereign's role to question it.
No, I suspect there will. I think what the point he was trying to make is that, behind the scenes there'll be more questions as to why are you asking me to do this.
Well, we'll see. But if William starts challenging the nature of advice, I think that could lead to constitutionally choppy waters ahead.
Wow, interesting.
Well, it's recollections may vary, isn't it, I suppose, as late Queen says. But in the 19th century, Walter Bagehot famously said a constitutional monarch has only 3 rights: to be consulted, to encourage, and to warn. I mean, do you think that's what's going on at the moment? And do you think that they will adhere to that advice? I think that they will adhere to that advice for the moment, definitely. Charles is on his best behaviour. Very apparent with the whole Trump state visit. Charles has got very different opinions to Trump on a number of subjects, including particularly the environment, as does William. But both Charles and William are going to be very nice to Donald Trump when he comes over, and they're going to put such differences to one side. Charles wants to help Keir Starmer's government, as he would any government, but he's making it very apparent that he's there to be helpful. That's the job.
That's the
job. And he's quite keen to do the job, isn't he? As we've seen from King Charles.
Yes.
One of the things that your book looks at as well is the way, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, the soft power deployment of the royal family, which was particularly, you pull out the example that almost all senior members of the working royal family post-Brexit were deployed across Europe.
Yeah.
All across Europe, from the Edinburghs, the then Wessexes, all of them, the far reach, to just sort of go and remind Europe that we might be out of the EU, but we're still part of Europe.
Even Prince Andrew was deployed. Extraordinarily enough.
Andrew was deployed, and we still have a relationship with Europe, amazingly. But some people would look at that and think, well, is that a political step too far? But actually, it's part of the job, isn't it, in terms of how the palace and the royal family are deployed by the government when we need a little bit of extra help.
Yes, that's what it's all about. And sometimes they don't want to do it. There was an example in a couple of examples in the 1970s. One was when the Queen had to put up with the Romanian dictator Ceausescu,
very famously.
who was awful.
Probably not her favourite house guest.
Not her favourite house guest.
And why is that? Is that because the government are so acutely aware of the sort of gold dust that the royal family can sprinkle when it comes to international heads of state?
I mean, I think the royal family can sprinkle gold dust, but there's only so much they can do. I think they can set an atmosphere. I mean, you know, a member of the royal family, particularly the sovereign or possibly the Prince of Wales, going, depending on what generation, who you're talking about, going abroad can have a wonderful impact and, you know, get crowds and interest and headlines that no mere politician could achieve. But they don't achieve miracles. And I was speaking to someone from the Foreign Office. I was speaking to someone from the Foreign Office about the attempt before Brexit to when David Cameron was trying to get a better deal for Britain with the EU, because if he succeeded in that, he might have won the referendum because he could have said, "Listen, we got better terms from the EU." So this is all part of the deployment of members of the royal family across Europe. And what the head of the Foreign Office told me was that, you know, in the end, all that wonderful soft power, which is real and does work, didn't trump, so Germany got several visits. Germany was most important in this, Angela Merkel. But in the end, all that soft power, that diplomacy, that royal gold dust
didn't change the outcome.
Didn't actually trump Germany's national self-interest.
I mean, you talk about the way in which the royal family can kind of use that soft power to do the government's, you know, deeds, if you like, and further their own interests. But there's really interesting points in your book where they kind of clash with the government because the two interests, the palace and the government's interests, are not aligned. So there was a brilliant point where the palace was having its funding reassessed for the royal household.
Yes.
And we talk about, you know, the gold dust and the soft power, but this was the moment in which the palace played hardball. Tell us a bit about that.
That was fascinating. That was real revelation, which came from the former head of the Treasury, Nick Macpherson, Lord Macpherson.
On the record, wonderfully.
And it was when the sovereign grant was being created, which was, you know, to replace the old system of funding the royal family was called the civil list. And
this was a reassessing how they get the money, how they get the public funds.
They just thought, people thought it wasn't a great way of doing it. There were better ways of doing it that would basically mean the palace could have more control over its money, wouldn't get more money, but have more control over it. And Osborne created this scheme that they would get 15%.
George Osborne, who's Chancellor at the time.
15% of the profits of the Crown Estate. Now, the Crown Estate is basically part of the government these days. It's Crown in name only. But this was just a sort of clever trick by Osborne to make it look royal.
Right.
And it was a clever sort of peg and it was for it to be set to. And it was 15%. And just fairly late in the day, the Treasury, so Macpherson, the head of the Treasury, and George Osborne, the Chancellor, they thought, it's just a little bit generous. We should turn it down a bit.
Maybe we should claw some of this back.
And I don't know how much they wanted to turn it back, but say 14% or whatever, 13%. And Macpherson was deputed to ring the money guy at the palace, Sir Alan Reed, the keeper of the Privy Purse. And in Macpherson's word, Reed played hardball. He wasn't budging. He said, no, this has all been agreed.
Deal's a deal. Too late now.
Exactly. And eventually Reed said, well, look, Osborne is due to come in for his pre-budget audience with the Queen. Before the night before the budget, the Chancellor always goes to see the Sovereign to say what's in the budget. Osborne's due to come in he can raise it then if he likes. Of course he didn't.
No.
More things in his mind, and perhaps he didn't really want to raise this awkward subject with the Queen. So,
But Macpherson told you that perhaps, you know, they still think that
and Macpherson
the royal household got a very good deal.
Thinks it was too generous.
On awkwardness, one of the things that comes from so many sources on and off the record throughout your book is this notion that politicians and prime ministers will go out of their way, of all colours, to avoid annoying or sort of causing awkwardness with the palace, to avoid arguments with the palace. Why?
It's fascinating.
Are they too differential?
Why?
There's an interesting...
I mean, Ken Clarke mentions it repeatedly, but so do other politicians.
I think it's for various reasons. For a start, many politicians are royalists in the sense they completely devotedly believe in the royal family. They have huge respect for the Queen. Also, I think they have, it's their political antennae. They think it wouldn't do them any good electorally in terms of public opinion to have a public spat with the palace. And I spoke to one politician, being a fairly senior minister, absolutely not a fawning royalist, someone who had a career before and after politics. And he said, I just wanted to please the Queen. He wanted to please her. And that's the relationship at the moment. But that relationship only survives as long as politicians believe that the country largely, broadly,
is in favour.
As soon as that public approval starts to erode, politicians, those who might be a bit more antsy about the royal family will be more prepared to have public differences with them.
Well, I mean, the polling consistently tends to show that they are. I mean, it's a very interesting generational divide, and younger people seem to be less and less in favour of just accepting that we have a constitutional monarchy going forwards. I suppose one of my biggest questions to you is, to what extent do you think the importance of political neutrality, or the appearance of political neutrality from members of the royal family and monarchs, keeps the public in favour of having a head of state and a head of nation that is different to an elected politician?
I think it's incredibly important because as soon as...
Is that the key to it? Is that the key to
yes,
being there?
Because as soon as your head of state... there are two phrases that get used, head of state and head of nation. The head of nation, it's all about being a public figure to unite the country in times of celebration or mourning or crisis or whatever. For instance, you think about the Queen's statement during COVID, incredibly powerful that, and Remembrance Sunday, all those things are incredibly important and
non-political.
If the head of state is in any way a controversial figure, a divisive figure that people don't believe in, that role becomes much more difficult to play.
Fascinating.
Val, this is your second book. Obviously, there was Courtiers before. We might be lucky and get a third book at some point.
Trilogy.
Fingers crossed. What's your fascination with the royal family, apart from having been a very successful and prolific royal correspondent at the Times before? Why do you keep writing about them?
Because it's fascinating watching this institution in flux. I think of myself as an outsider. I'm neither a royalist nor a Republican, and you watch them, and it's changing times, but imperceptibly changing times. We don't realize. I mean, the support for the monarchy has gone down in the last 20 years quite steadily. Now, how far it'll go down, I don't know. And to watch how it changes and adapts to changing times is fascinating.
Well, that's us told.
Well, we'd have to agree with that, I think, given that
Valentine Low, it's been an absolute joy.
Thank you so
Comrade,
much.
to have you back. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. The book is Power and the Palace by Valentine Low, of course. And thank you for listening to The Royals with our very special guest.
Very special guest. And if you want to hear more from Valentine and I'm going to be with him next Saturday, September the 13th, at the Windsor Festival, talking all things Power and the Palace.
Wonder if any of the royal neighbours will come down to that.
So do come along to that, Your Majesty, if you would like.
And as always, if you'd like to get in touch with us, please do email in at theroyals@thetimes.co.uk. But for now, bye, Roya.
Bye, Kate. And bye, Val.
Bye, Val.